Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Alonso Vega left the operating room exhausted, his gown soaked through. It had been a very complex case. The patient's heart had stopped multiple times, and they had barely managed to bring her back from the brink. His assistant, Nurse Julia Krus, was also changing her attire, wiping sweat from her forehead, and chattering incessantly. "You're a true virtuoso, Alonso. I'm in awe of you. I thought we had lost her for sure, no more chances, but your talent proved stronger. You're simply precious. With your abilities, you should be earning millions in a private clinic, not working here for peanuts, performing surgeries day and night." They entered the staff room, and Alonso put on the kettle. "To be honest, I've been offered that many times, but I've gotten used to it here. I was sent here for my internship, and somehow I stayed. It's all become familiar, like home. And by the way, it's not me who's great, Julia, it's you. Nowadays, you can't lure anyone into surgery straight out of medical school, and you see how tough the work is, yet you handle it all. You'll go far." Suddenly, a ward nurse, Jacinta, burst into the lounge. "Oh, Alonso, you're still here? It's great. I can't seem to find Lucio Rodriguez anywhere. The patient in room 7 is demanding a surgeon come to him urgently. Something's not right with his stitches." The surgeon sighed. "I'll be there in a moment, Jacinta. Let me have some coffee first, and I'll go. Give me 10 minutes, and I'll be there. I need to come to my senses." Julia protested. "This Lucio is always late. It's time for you to go home, and here you are overworking yourself. You don't spare yourself at all." Alonso sipped his coffee and tasted the pastry with a bitter smile on his face. "Enough of that, Julia. He has a family and a growing son. As for me, where do I need to rush? My mother passed away a year ago, and it was agonizing to watch her die. And I divorced my wife, Luz. It was my own choice. We were too different, like strangers. And God didn't bless us with children, for which I'm thankful. So, I have no reason to pity myself. The later I return, the less time I'll have for foolish thoughts. Well, we've chatted enough. I'll go check on Leon." Julia could only shake her head. She secretly liked this talented and always slightly melancholic doctor. Talking with him was pleasant, and working alongside him was comfortable. He never yelled and always tried to explain things comprehensively and patiently. It was evident that he was a very kind person. Not like the annoying Lucio, who only seemed to strut around, praising himself and shamelessly ogling the young nurses. He was a very unpleasant fellow and, frankly, a mediocre specialist. Everyone in the department knew that Lucio despised Alonso and couldn't stand it when patients praised him for saving lives or receiving work awards. Lucio's demeanor changed instantly, and he made snide remarks. Alonso was just finishing up an examination, reassuring the patient that everything was healing as it should, when the disheveled Lucio burst into the room. "What's actually happening here? This, as far as I know, is my patient. Why are you interfering where you don't need to? Or are you trying to show off once again?" Jacinta, flustered, interjected. "Don't yell, Lucio. It's unethical. I called Alonso myself because I couldn't find you for a whole hour. And the patient demanded a surgeon. What was I supposed to do? You should thank him instead. He should have been home by now, but he hasn't declined." Lucio calmed down. "Just an hour, really. I was gone for a short while. And you, Alonso, go ahead. Thanks, we won't detain you any longer." The surgeon chose not to escalate the situation, bid farewell politely, and headed home. He was feeling lonely in his empty apartment. He shivered, shuffled to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. He peered into the fridge. There was not much there either. He had been so preoccupied and tired that he had forgotten to go shopping. Alonso reheated leftover soup. The kettle boiled and whistled, yet he sat there, untouched food before him, staring off into space, lost in thought about life. A couple of weeks passed. Alonso was in the midst of filling out patient histories when someone knocked at his office door. It was the senior nurse, Julia Lozano, a stern and even severe woman in her years, but a specialist like no other. She began a worrisome conversation. "Alonso, we need to do something with our newcomer, Julia. Something about her doesn't sit right with me. She's always running off to the abandoned wing around the corner. Not only is this happening during working hours in secret, but we also have no idea what she's up to there. What if she's selling drugs? Oh, we'll be in trouble if problems arise." The surgeon frowned. "Julia? And drugs? I'll never believe it. But it is strange indeed. The old therapy area has been closed for repairs for a while, and the building is under reconstruction. What could she be doing there? Thanks for your vigilance, Julia. I'll certainly look into it." From that day on, the surgeon began to observe Julia. He noticed that after a surgery, instead of resting and having coffee, she'd look around and hurry off to the pharmacy. She'd emerge with a bag and head toward the same abandoned building. Alonso slowly followed her, waiting for the right moment. The building was empty, and all sounds echoed loudly. Alonso immediately recognized Julia's voice. He tiptoed into the room and started observing. An elderly woman lay on an old cot, covered with a government-issued sheet, struggling to breathe with a raspy wheeze. It was hard to determine her age. Julia was fussing around her, lamenting. "Marina, forgive me, I couldn't come earlier. There was an emergency surgery, and then another one. I've just managed to come now. The attack can't subside now. Hang in there, I'll give you an injection, and you'll breathe with the inhaler. It should help." Soon, the woman's breathing eased and calmed down, and the asthma attack passed. Julia let out a sigh. "Phew, thank God. Okay, I've given you all your pills and brought your portable toilet. Here, have some milk and a bun, and eat while you can. Well, I have to run, or they'll catch me. I'll be here tomorrow morning, even before work. I'll bring you some warm food from home." The surgeon looked closely at the woman and gasped, losing his ability to speak. His jaw literally dropped. She was an exact copy of his late mother. Almost identical. It was her spitting image. He couldn't comprehend how such a thing could be possible. She had the same eyes with slightly drooping corners, wrinkles around the nose and lips, the same nose with a slight hump, and most importantly, the same gaze. His mother had the same gaze, especially when she was ill, distant and slightly bewildered. Julia, unsuspecting of anything, exited the room and bumped into the surgeon, who resembled a statue made of plaster. She let out a scream as she was frightened to death, thinking she had been caught, and started babbling. "Alonso, what are you doing here? How did you find out? Just promise me you won't tell anyone, I'm begging you." This woman, Marina, collapsed right on the street. She was having an attack. She has asthma and lung inflammation, so it was all mixed up. I tried to get her admitted to the hospital, but she has no documents, and it's obvious she's homeless. So they didn't take her. But what was I supposed to do? The poor woman was in such distress. She needed help urgently, so I managed to get her here, borrowed a sheet from the laundry, and laid her down. Now I'm running around trying to treat her. I managed to bring her fever down, and now I'm giving her antibiotics according to the protocol we were taught in college. But I don't know what to do about the asthma. The attacks are becoming more frequent and severe. I just can't figure it out. And her leg swelling is really bad." Alonso shook his head, as if coming back to his senses, and muttered, "How did I find out? The senior nurse was gossiping. She thought you were up to some shady business here. But why scold you? You're trying to help a person, even if she's homeless. And how could they not take her? That's inhumane. After all, we're not a private clinic. I'll try to address this issue with the head of the department tomorrow. She needs a comprehensive examination and treatment." He approached the patient quietly, examined her legs, palpated, and said thoughtfully, I believe the attacks worsened due to the lung inflammation, and there are likely cardiac issues at play here as well. The swelling is probably related to that. The next day, as promised, Alonso went to the head of the department and spent a whole hour persuading them to admit the homeless woman, Marina, for treatment. We can't just leave someone to die like that. I understand she has no documents or insurance, but as an exception, please let her in. She has severe asthma, it's a really complicated case, and she needs to be hospitalized urgently. She's in her senior years, doesn't she have the right to receive help? After much reluctance, the department head agreed, and they transferred the woman to the internal medicine unit. Julia thanked the surgeon. "Thank you, Alonso, so much. I feel so sorry for this suffering woman. She has no money, no documents, and no means to get treatment. Don't worry, once she's feeling better, I'll figure something out for her accommodation. Since I've taken on helping her." From that point on, Alonso frequently checked up on his new patient. He bought her a gown, underwear, slippers, a toothbrush, and all the essentials. He personally monitored her treatment and tried cautiously to inquire about who she was and where she came from, hoping to understand the connection between her and his late mother. Marina was a very secretive person and spoke little. All she said was, "Thank you, kind person, and thank Julia too. I've never met people like you before. It's just my fate, I have no family, no home. God punished me for my sins." And she immediately began to cry bitterly. Julia also noticed that the surgeon seemed overly concerned about the fate of this elderly woman. She remembered his face turning as white as chalk when he first saw her. Something was off here, so she decided to ask him directly. One day, they walked out of the department together, ready to say goodbye, but Julia touched the surgeon's arm. "Wait, Alonso. I wanted to ask. You know this woman, right? Where is she from? It couldn't have been a coincidence that you personally convinced the department head to admit her. Is she a relative of yours or an acquaintance? Who is she?" Alonso hesitated and reluctantly replied, "I just felt really sorry for her, that's all. She has no one to help her, and it's not a big deal for me. Sorry, Julia, I really need to run home, you know how it is." In reality, Alonso had no important matters to attend to. He simply didn't want to share anything with the curious nurse, especially since he didn't fully understand the situation himself yet. He was afraid that people might start making fun of him and spreading rumors around the department. Lucio became furious when he heard about this story. He spent a whole hour arguing that the hospital wasn't a shelter for homeless people, and if they started treating everyone without insurance, there wouldn't be enough space for normal patients. In his opinion, a homeless person was no longer human, just a burden. The mystery that the patient resembled his mother hadn't let Alonso live in peace. He decided to do something. He brought his mother's photos to work and, during a break, went back to Marina's room. She was feeling much better by then, treatment was showing positive results, and she almost wasn't suffering from her attacks. He started by asking about her condition and then got to the main point. "Marina, take a look at these photos. This is my mother, Ophelia. She passed away a year ago. You're a spitting image of her. How is this even possible? Please don't tell me you don't remember or don't know. I'm begging you, tell me. You even have the same mole above your eyebrow. When I saw you in that abandoned building, I almost fainted. I felt so sick. I thought my mother had come back to life." Marina studied the photos, then looked intently and for a long time at Alonso, tears streaming down her cheeks as she wiped them with the edges of her handkerchief. She whispered, "How is it possible that she's dead? Why? This can't be." Then she let out a deep sigh and began a lengthy story, almost like a confession of her whole life. "I grew up in a village. My mother was a dairy maid, and my father was a trailer driver. I have a twin sister, Ophelia. We may look alike on the outside, like two peas in a pod, but our characters are completely different. Ophelia was always quiet, calm, and hardworking. She has helped our mother on the farm since we were little. She ran to the barn, carried buckets, and even took care of the garden. As for me, I thought Ophelia was boring. I loved spending time with the village kids, just like everyone else, running around and staying out late. My parents would discipline me with a switch or stinging nettles, but it only made me more stubborn. I had a falling out with Ophelia at a young age. We would fight and argue all the time. Our mother would sometimes cry in frustration after one of my misadventures, saying, "Had I known you'd turn out like this, I wouldn't have given birth to you at all. You're not a child, it's a punishment to have you." When we turned 15, something in me snapped completely. Ophelia was impossible to get out of the house, and I couldn't be kept indoors. We were both lovely looking with dark hair, and the village boys were falling over themselves for us. They promised eternal love just to get into bed with us. Ophelia was obsessed with the idea of studying, moving to the city, and enrolling in college. As for me, I had found myself a suitor, Raphael. Everyone warned me not to date him. He was a notorious troublemaker and brawler, not to mention he had quite the taste for alcohol. But that's exactly the kind of person I liked. Someone who would sing songs with a guitar, steal flowers from old ladies' gardens, and share wine with tart apples. Raphael had an old house that he inherited from his grandmother, and we started living there together. And I had just turned 18. My parents almost cursed me. You could say it was a shame for the whole village. An unmarried girl fooling around with a man. Unheard of. My sister also began to avoid me, and every time we met, she tried to reason with me. "Marina, what are you doing? Pull yourself together. Why are you embarrassing our family? People will look down on you, and no one will marry you now. Raphael is unreliable. Why are you clinging to him? He'll just fool around with you and then leave you. Forget about him, come back to the family, and obey our father. Go find a job, or we can move to the city together so you can study. Start a new life." But I was so blindly in love with Raphael that I didn't want to listen to anyone. On top of that, I got offended at the slightest thing. I thought they were trying to break us apart and that they were jealous of my happiness. Raphael hardly ever worked. He was the chairman's nephew, and the hard, dirty work of the village didn't suit him. I wasn't in a hurry to become a dairymaid or a pig keeper either. In the evenings, we would gather at our house with a group of friends, drink wine, and strum the guitar. Life seemed fun and carefree to me, and I considered my parents and sister to be killjoys. And then I became pregnant. I thought, well, now Raphael would definitely marry me. How could he not? But it turned out differently. He wasn't happy at all. In fact, he started disappearing from home, going out on the town all the time. I cried and begged him to stop, but he didn't care. He would shout at me, "I'm free. And you want to tie me up? Did I ever tell you I wanted to have kids?" So, I had to give birth without being married. A midwife helped me deliver at home. Thankfully, everything went smoothly without complications. So, you're my son, and that's how I gave birth to you. Wait, I don't understand. A son? But the shocked surgeon didn't manage to finish his sentence. I understand, Alonso, it's hard for you to believe this, but please listen to me until the end. After the birth, my life turned into a living hell. My mother and sister took pity on me and sent me diapers, clothes, and some food. I took care of you day and night while Raphael was drinking and partying. And then my mother couldn't bear the shame and the rumors anymore. She had a stroke due to the stress, collapsed right in the garden, and passed away. And soon after that, my father too died in a tragic accident. His trailer overturned, and he died. It all happened one after another. My sister begged me to come to my senses and come back home. But it all fell on her shoulders, arranging the funerals, taking care of the household. Maybe if I had listened to her back then, nothing bad would have happened. But even though I knew better, whenever Raphael looked at me, everything else didn't matter. I was ready to die for him because I loved him to death. Once Raphael found out that I was now an orphan and no one would help us, he completely lost it. He started to become violent, and on top of that, he would frequently lose his temper. One time he hit me so hard that I was unconscious for 2 hours. This went on for about 6 months. I almost never left the house covered in bruises. When I heard the gate creak, I would hide you and myself. I knew Raphael would start hitting me now. I cried, covering myself with my hands, and he shouted, "You ruined my whole life. Who asked you to have a child? Why is he yelling? If it wasn't for him, I'd be having a good time right now and wouldn't care about anything in the world. But you brought me trouble." And one day, something turned inside me. I was out in the yard washing in the trough, and you were sleeping in the stroller when Raphael came home and started another argument. He rushed at me, and suddenly I pushed him with all my might. I put all my strength into it. And he was drunk, stumbled, and fell, hitting his head on the porch. I got scared and rushed to him. "Raphael, are you alive? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." He regained consciousness, looked at me, but didn't touch me. He just said, "Oh, is that so? You dared to hit a man? I'm leaving and won't come back. You'll kick yourself later." He slammed the gate and left, stumbling. The neighbors saw it all. They were whispering for a long time. I didn't think much of it. We used to fight and argue with him so often that it became routine. And in the evening, the local police officer knocked on my door, and he was with other officers from the police station. They said that Raphael was dead, and I was to blame for it. They said the neighbors saw me push him, and he fell. I defended myself, cried, and couldn't believe it. But Raphael walked away from me on his own 2 feet. He was alive. How can this be? And they told me. He didn't go far. He collapsed on the side of the road and died. It's likely that blow led to his death. We'll perform an autopsy and find out for sure. For now, come with us. You're detained on suspicion of murdering your partner." And then Raphael's relative, the chairman, showed up, yelling in front of the whole courtyard. I told my nephew not to get involved with this little viper. She clung to him like a fly, climbed into his bed, and then brought an unknown child into the world. Raphael told me more than once that he wanted to get away from her and that the child wasn't even his. And now she's decided to kill him. Exactly. No one else could have done it. No one. They took me away and put me in prison. Ophelia rushed over right away, even while they were interrogating me. Rumors spread in the village like wildfire. She silently and feverishly started gathering you up and whispered, "I'm taking Alonso. If anything happens, I'll say he's my son. Otherwise, they'll send him to an orphanage. You're such a fool, Marina. You've brought nothing but trouble, both to yourself and me." That same night, Ophelia left everything behind, her house, her belongings, and got on a train with you to the city. I never saw her again. It was later, when I was serving my 10-year sentence in prison and was already well acquainted with the life behind bars, that she sent me a single letter. "Hello, sister. I've taken custody of Alonso. I've arranged all the documents. I met a good man, Edgar, who accepted him as his own son. I changed his and my last names too, so now there's no connection between us except blood. I can't forgive you for our mother's death. If it weren't for you, she could still be alive. We have a loving family, and I love Alonso as my own son, maybe even more. We're raising him with love and care, hoping that he'll never inherit the bad blood from you or Raphael. Don't look for us. You've ruined your own fate, so spare the fate of your son. Why would he need a mother like you? What can you give him? It's a pity, Marina, that things turned out this way. But even from childhood, you were always like a stranger to us. I don't even know who you've gone after. Goodbye. You don't have to reply to this. I intentionally left a different address. Don't be angry and don't curse me, sister. It will be better for everyone this way. I'll send you packages whenever possible, but don't expect more. Live your life the way that is right for you. That's it. I've read that letter thousands of times, worn it out to shreds, and memorized it by heart during my years in prison. I shed countless tears over it. It was beyond description. At first, I was angry at Ophelia. I even hated her. I thought, how could she do this? I'm the mother. I gave birth to you. How could she take my son away from me? But then I cooled down, and I realized that I owed my sister a thank you. After all, without her intervention, you would have ended up in an orphanage, and would life there be any better? And you would grow up hating your mother, the prison guard. But now, you're growing up in a loving family, well-clothed and well-fed, and I can have a peaceful heart. So, I reconciled myself to it. I decided that it truly was better for everyone. And then I was released from prison. I didn't know where to go. It was a shame to return to the village. The neighbors were already avoiding me as it was. Why bother them? I didn't search for you, and really, what could I offer you? I had nothing, no property, no estate, just a stigma that would follow me for life. So I wandered from place to place, drinking heavily for a while. It seems I do have that bad blood in me, so I started drinking. I had relationships with men and even got pregnant once, but I couldn't carry the baby to term. That's the kind of mother you have, Alonso, a wayward one. I'm not that old, just 53, but I look like a frail old woman. I've picked up all sorts of ailments in prison, and life has hardened me. Well, son, now you know the truth. Has it made things any easier for you? Will you now hate me like everyone else? Despise me? Tell me, is that so? After all, I truly am insignificant. I haven't accomplished anything worthwhile in life. I've wasted it all for nothing. I'm so ashamed. Marina burst into bitter tears, her eyes lowered, her whole body trembling. Alonso couldn't bear it. Tears filled his eyes. He sat down on the bed and hugged his mother, gathering her in his arms. Come on, Mom. How could I ever hate you? No matter how you look at it, you're the one who gave me life. I'm neither God nor a judge. It's only you who has to answer for your mistakes up there. The most important thing is that you've understood and realized everything. Please forgive me. I didn't even know that my own mother was my aunt. You know what? When you're better, we'll go to my father's. I'll introduce you to him. He loved Mom so much, he adored her. And when he sees you, he won't believe his eyes. Don't even think about it, my dear. I won't let you go now. You'll live with me. I have a spacious apartment that I've earned for myself. There's plenty of room for everyone. Well, that's enough. Don't cry. Let's forget everything that happened in the past. We have to live in the here and now. Now I have you, and you have me. Isn't that wonderful? Marina looked at Alonso with such tenderness. Thank you, my dear. Thank you, my love. Could it be that fate has finally smiled upon this wayward woman in her old age? Could it be that I've finally earned forgiveness? I never even hoped to find you. I thought I would die by the side of the road, like a stray dog. Julia, my guardian angel, helped me with everything. What an amazing girl she is. It's so rare to meet people like her these days. Thank you for your kind words. They suddenly heard. Alonso and his mother hadn't noticed that Julia had been standing in the doorway all this time, so she heard everything. But she was too shocked to even move or reveal herself. Alonso turned around and, upon seeing the nurse, leaped up. Well, there you have it. Now you, too, Julia, know my secret. I hope you won't tell anyone about it. Can I count on you? The girl nodded. Of course, Alonso, I understand everything. I guess I've interrupted you. I'll run along now. They might catch on soon. And it's time for you too. I'm so happy for you. It's so touching when family members find each other after many years. I even shed some tears. Alonso looked at Julia in a completely different way. Somehow, at that very moment, he realized that he loved her. And those lovely golden locks of hair peeking out from under her medical cap, her beautiful radiant green eyes, her soft and gentle smile, and most importantly, her soul, kind, compassionate, and unlike anyone else's. That evening, Alonso gathered his courage and invited Julia to his place. "Julia, I'd like to invite you over. Please don't think anything bad of me. I really like you, of course, but I'm not rude or some kind of maniac. Let's make dinner and spend some quality time together. I feel so lonely spending evenings alone." The girl clearly lit up with joy and agreed right away. Her heart fluttered. Finally, Alonso noticed her not just as a colleague, but as a woman. They went to the surgeon's house, bought groceries and delicious wine along the way, and had a feast for the entire world. They cooked a duck with apples together, prepared a salad, and had a wonderful time. Julia's cheeks turned rosy from the wine. She laughed and chatted endlessly. Alonso looked at her with such admiration, as if he were marveling at her. Then, hesitatingly, he took her hand, kissed each finger, and said, "I feel so good with you, Julia. You can't imagine. I know I'm 10 years older than you. You're only 25. But you're so smart, serious, and determined beyond your years. One can only dream of a wife and a mistress like you." He was so nervous, afraid that she would laugh and leave right then, but she suddenly looked at him just as intently and said with depth, "Why are you men so blind? Can't you see, Alonso, that I like you? I've been dreaming for a while now that you would finally see me not only as an assistant in surgeries, but as a woman. I've even changed my hairstyle, trying to get closer to you. But you've just been saying things like, 'You're doing great, Julia. You've worked well.' And every time, I sigh and think, when will you finally say, 'I love you, Julia?'" Suddenly, the surgeon lifted her up in his arms and whispered softly, "I love you, Julia. I'm an idiot. A fool. How could I not notice such charm? Tell me?" They burst into laughter, and then they started kissing passionately, to the point of losing themselves. The wave of pleasure overwhelmed them. From that day on, the couple started dating, and of course, their happy faces and love-filled eyes didn't escape the notice of their colleagues. The nurses whispered, "Have you noticed how much Alonso has changed? You can barely recognize him. He used to be dull and boring, but now he's always smiling, refreshed his wardrobe, and got a trendy haircut. And our Julia has blossomed. She's literally glowing and can't take her eyes off him. Something's happening here. He must have been courting her for a reason when he kept praising her talent." These rumors reached Lucio, and he became furious. He practically started hating Alonso. You see, he had long been attracted to Julia. He had a weakness for young girls in general. He would practically drool at the sight of Julia's enticing figure and her huge, innocent green eyes. He had tried to drop hints, joke around, and give compliments, but she responded sharply and walked away, cutting off his attempts at every turn. So, she didn't care about him paying attention to her, but this praised colleague was getting love and passionate nights? Really? He thought to himself. Just wait and see. Both of you will be kicked out of the department along with your shenanigans. I'll make sure of it. And Lucio fervently got to work. He started writing anonymous complaints, claiming that Alonso systematically picked up homeless people from the streets and treated them, as well as illegally sold medications and falsified reports. Moreover, he corrupted the staff. He turned the new young nurse, Julia Krus, into his latest lover. Within a month, there were quite a few of these complaints, and the chief doctor couldn't bear it anymore. He had to summon the surgeon for an inquiry. Alonso arrived, unsuspecting, and asked in surprise, "Rodrigo, did you call for me? Is something wrong? Are there any inspections scheduled?" The chief doctor immediately started sternly. "I want to ask you about this. What's going on? I've received the 5th complaint about you from the staff, my dear. Colleagues wrote that you're corrupting young girls, sleeping with the new nurse, taking on homeless patients, and even dealing drugs on the side. What do you think you're doing? This is audacity. You've gone too far. Alonso also flared up. It was disgusting to listen to this blatant lie. You know what, Rodrigo? Before you started slinging mud at me, you should have gotten up from your chair and investigated for yourself. I won't tolerate such treatment. I might just leave. I've had enough of this place. You work like a horse here, sweat blood, and save lives, and yet they still try to defame you? What a wonderful team. There's no doubt about it. People are really friendly here. The head of the department practically jumped. How dare you talk to me like that? Here's the paper and pen. You can leave. I won't keep you. I won't allow any shady dealings in my presence. Alonso wrote his resignation in the heat of the moment, and Rodrigo signed it right away. And so, the best surgeon in the department was left without a job. He bid farewell to everyone, gathered his things, and left. He felt hurt to the core by how they treated him. He had dedicated his whole life to this place with loyalty and honesty. And they threw him out like a puppy. As he was leaving, he whispered to the startled Julia, "I'll be waiting for you at home tonight." He had moved his mother to his place after her treatment a month ago. Now, in the evenings, he always had a warm dinner and heartfelt conversations waiting for him. And today, as his mother busied herself at the stove, she exclaimed in surprise, "Alonso, my dear, you're back already. Were you released early? You look pale and upset. What happened?" The man sighed. "I was fired. Can you believe it, Mom? I've been in this department my whole life. Since my university years. I've never refused anyone's help. I've taken extra shifts and worked overtime. And here it is, the gratitude. It's so frustrating, I even want to cry." His mother hugged her son and reassured him. "Don't be upset, my dear, everything will work out somehow. You're a specialist, your hands are golden. You'll find another job, for sure. And what about Julia? Is she coming today? She hasn't been here for 3 days. I miss her. I've grown fond of her, as if she were my daughter. Dad, this is my fiancée, Julia. We love each other very much. Well, let's go inside the house, and we can talk there." Everyone entered the house, settled comfortably on the sofas, and Alonso briefly recounted the whole story of his birth to his father. His father turned pale, then red, and eventually started to speak as well. "Here's how it happened. Ophelia was working as a saleswoman, even though our baby was still an infant. She made arrangements with a neighbor to look after the child when she was on her shift. She was also studying remotely to become a goods expert. The store was conveniently close to my house, and I used to go there often for bread. One day, I went to buy bread, and there I met Ophelia. And that was it. I saw her and was captivated. Believe it or not, I fell in love at first sight. At first, she didn't want to date me at all. She said her child was little, and she didn't have time for anything else right now. Why burden yourself with this? She asked me. But I managed to persuade her. I started visiting them, and when I held you, Alonso, in my arms, I felt a connection deep inside. You looked at me, smiled, and reached out your little hands. I started helping Ophelia, both around the house and with taking care of you. I also provided financial support, and she began to believe in me, thaw, and accept my love. So Ophelia and I started living together and got married, all very honorable. I gave you my surname. You've always been family to me. You know, my boy, your mother, and I lived in perfect harmony. We had our disagreements, and we made up, but we never stayed angry at each other for long. She knew how to get to me. She'd bake some pies, and the smell would fill the whole apartment. She'd bring a couple of them over on a little plate, and she'd give me a sly look. How could I resist? And I tried to spoil her. I gave her flowers often. I knew she loved daisies more than any other fancy rose. I'd go to the market in the morning and buy from the old ladies there, and by the time Ophelia woke up, I'd already have arranged a bouquet in the kitchen. She was just melting. Small things, but delightful. Ah, Ophelia. That cursed illness took her away from me. Robbed me of her. But you know, we lived together for so long, and she never once mentioned a sister. She only talked about being from a village and that her parents had died a long time ago, and that's the whole story. And here it turns out, my wife was raising someone else's child as her own. That's how things are. I'd never have thought. She loved you, Alonso, more than life itself. If you got sick, she'd stay up all night by your crib, kissing and nursing you. And what's more, God never blessed us with our own children, so you, son, were always the light in our window and the purpose of our lives. So, don't be angry with us, my boy, for how things turned out. You were always family to me. There's no one closer. But I'm glad you found your real mother, no matter what. After all, she did give birth to you. So now you're living with her. And here's what I didn't tell you, son. I'm getting married. Julia and I have already picked a wedding date. So get ready to dance at the wedding. And things will work out with the job. Later on, they all talked for a long time, enjoyed tea with cake, and savored freshly picked strawberries from the garden. Edgar kept stealing glances at Marina and thought, oh Lord, she looks just like Ophelia. Exactly the same face. Unbelievable. Life continued its course. Soon, Alonso and Julia were invited to work at a private clinic, starting part-time and then transitioning to full-time positions. That's where the doctor's abilities were recognized and rewarded as they deserved. A year later, Alonso's reputation spread far beyond the region, and appointments with him had to be scheduled a month in advance. Julia also earned a decent salary at the clinic. The family decided to sell Edgar's apartment and house and purchase a spacious country mansion to live in together. After all, the parents were getting older and needed care and attention. Julia became pregnant and gave birth to a wonderful baby girl named Marta. Marina and Edgar were eager to spend time with their granddaughter. They grew very close. Edgar often talked about life with Ophelia, how Alonso grew up, and how Marina absorbed everything like a sponge, as if reliving their lives together mentally. She visited Ophelia's grave, repented, and asked for forgiveness for all her youthful mistakes. She thanked her multiple times for raising such a wonderful person out of her son. Marina no longer held any resentment towards her sister. She understood that she herself couldn't have given even a fraction of what Ophelia gave to Alonso. After all, he grew up in an atmosphere of kindness, love, and tranquility. Even if Raphael hadn't died, could they have lived in peace? There was no way for it to happen. So, it could be said that Ophelia protected her nephew from all adversities and sheltered him under her wing. 10 years had passed. Alonso continued to work at the same clinic and had long become the head doctor, while Julia became the senior nurse. Their daughter grew up smart and clever, delighting her parents with excellent grades. The grandmother couldn't get enough of her granddaughter. It seemed like she was trying to fill the void in her soul that resulted from not raising her son and not providing him with warmth and affection. Now she was making up for it wholeheartedly. On an ordinary day, a young couple rushed into the clinic's hallway, carrying a boy in their arms. The boy was moaning, and blood was flowing heavily from his leg, staining the pristine floor. The girl was shouting, "Help! Save him! The child is dying." Nurse Eleonora was shocked. She took the child and called for Alonso, while also trying to explain to the visitors that the clinic was private and they would have to pay for everything. But they kept yelling, "What now? Aren't you going to help him? How are we supposed to know if it's private or not? We saw the boy fall off his bicycle, badly injuring his leg. He's crying and trying to stand up. And you happen to be right here. So, we brought him to you." Alonso firmly said, "Eleonora, there's no time to figure out who's who. Prepare the operating room. The situation is serious. It seems the tendon is injured. Time is of the essence. All right, champ. Don't drift away. Everything will be all right. What's your name? How old are you? Don't cry, answer quickly and clearly. The boy stammered in fear. I'm Pablo, 10 years old. Does it hurt a lot? You're going to have surgery, right? I won't die, will I? Alonso smiled. No, Pablo, you won't die. Soon you'll be playing with a ball again. They'll give you an injection and you'll fall asleep. Don't be afraid. And when you wake up, it'll all be behind you. Take him to the first operating room. I'll be there shortly. Then he turned to the couple. Thank you for not leaving the boy in trouble. It means a lot. You don't need to worry about money. Just go. I'll take care of it myself. The operation was a success. The leg was skillfully stitched up, and the child was still under anesthesia, fast asleep. Before Alonso could change out of his surgical attire, Lucio burst into his office. Lucio was that malicious surgeon from Alonso's previous workplace, and he started shouting. Where's my son, Pablo? What happened to him? Someone explain to me what's going on. And suddenly, upon seeing Alonso, Lucio stumbled on his words. The surgeon smiled and replied, Hello, Lucio. Here we are again. Don't be so loud, your son is fine, I just operated on him. He fell off his bicycle and cut his leg badly on a piece of broken glass, injuring the tendon. Fortunately, passers-by noticed him and brought him here. It was a young couple. They didn't know it was a private clinic. But I couldn't just ignore the boy's need for help, so I performed the surgery without charge. Pablo is still under anesthesia and sleeping. A nurse is monitoring him. He should wake up soon. Lucio sincerely thanked the surgeon, feeling deeply ashamed for all the wrongdoings he had done to such a good person. He babbled. Thank you, Alonso, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart. You saved my son. You truly are a good-hearted person. I'll pay for everything, don't worry. And you know, Alonso, I want to ask you for forgiveness. It was me who made those slanderous accusations against you back then, which led to your dismissal. Forgive me. I couldn't stand the thought that you were more talented, successful, loved, and respected. So, I decided to hurt you. I don't even know why. And I even felt jealous of Julia. I liked her too. I know I'm married, but... The surgeon just sighed and philosophically replied. I'm not angry, honestly. Besides, as it turned out, everything happens for the best. I would never have dared to change my life. I would have kept struggling for those meager wages. But things fell into place on their own. Now I'm content with my work. I'm married, raising a daughter, and finding my birth mother. I'm finally happy, Lucio, I swear. So, let's not dwell on past grievances. We all have our shortcomings. Though I admit, I did suffer quite painfully back then, being falsely accused and fired. But Julia and my parents supported me and assured me that everything would work out, and it did. So, shall we go see how your young fighter is doing? He did really well and held on firmly. He didn't lose his spirit. They entered the ward just as the boy was waking up. Seeing his father, he brightened up. Dad, you came. You found me? I was so scared. You won't scold me, will you? I mean, I bent the new sports bike, and even the wheel got punctured. You just bought it for me. I didn't mean to, I promise. Lucio hugged his son. My boy, my sweetheart. I was so worried about you. Thankfully, those people who saved you had your phone and called me to tell me where they brought you. I won't scold you, don't worry. But from now on, please don't stray too far from home. You see how things can go wrong. And let's give a big thank you to Alonso for saving you. Even though the clinic is private, he could have refused. He's a true talent, and now I can rest easy about you. I know you'll be running around soon. Lucio suddenly suggested. You know what? Why don't you and your family come visit us when Pablo recovers? We'd be very happy. Alonso replied. How about you come to us instead? Why should we all squeeze into the apartment? I have a spacious country mansion now with a big yard and a gazebo. I'll introduce you to my daughter and parents, and we can grill some barbecue. They parted ways with heartfelt farewells, shaking hands as if old grievances never existed and deciding to be friends as families. At home, Alonso recounted the encounter to his wife. She tensed up and said, Darling, are you absolutely sure it's a good idea to start a friendship with Lucio? He did so many terrible things to us. Do you think he could have changed? What if he's planning something again? Who knows? It's unsettling somehow. I still vividly remember how much he hated you and gave me those spiteful looks. Alonso kissed Julia and responded, Sweetheart, you're always right about everything. Making this decision wasn't easy for me either. I barely recovered from that betrayal and deception back then. But you know, when I saw him today and looked into his eyes, they weren't lying. He sincerely asked for forgiveness. Let's give the man a second chance. He has a wonderful son, Pablo, who's the same age as our Marta. He's Lucio's younger child. Let's try to mend the relationship. But that's for later. Let Pablo recover first. Fortunately, Pablo quickly got back on his feet, and soon two families met. Julia was the most nervous, for some reason. She didn't fully trust Lucio, expecting some kind of catch. But everything went wonderfully. Lucio had a lovely wife and two sons. They had a great time, enjoying aromatic barbecue and wine brought by Alonso from the south last summer. Already in high spirits, Lucio stood up, raised his glass, and said, I want to toast the people who completely changed my perception of life and led me to change through their personal example. My longtime colleague and truly talented surgeon, Alonso, and his charming wife, Julia. You see, I used to believe that in the pursuit of fame and career, any means were fair, and there was no room for remorse. That's when I did terrible things to people, and Alonso was among those I harmed. I thought I was riding high, but no. Patients still sought him out, coming to his private clinic. And when he saved my son and took him in for surgery without a second thought, I looked at everything in a new light. I started to reflect. What would I do in his place? What would matter more to me, a brilliant career and a steady job, or the life of an unfamiliar boy? One for whom I might even have to pay and face consequences from higher-ups for acting independently? I felt so ashamed. It's true. I realized that Alonso is a person with a genuinely big and kind heart. The same can be said about Julia. I remember that story when she secretly helped a woman on the street and treated her. I was the first to object back then. How could she? But now, looking at your united family, I think Julia was absolutely right. She helped a person, just a person, regardless of who they were, you see? It's invaluable. My friends, please forgive me for being such an obstinate fool. Thanks to you, I've truly changed, and I'd like to continue being friends with you. Everyone applauded, and even Marina shed a tear. Alonso said, Thank you for your kind words, Lucio. We're all in. So let's raise our glasses to friendship. Come on, bottoms up. Since then, the two surgeons have become close friends, never bringing up the past. And 10 years later, their children, Marta and Pablo, fell in love with each other. Thus, their teenage friendship smoothly transformed into love. Now, both surgeons joyfully danced at their children's weddings, becoming not only friends but also family. Life is full of surprises, and humans are wired to do both good and not so good things. What matters is timely reflection, realizing the truth, and, most importantly, knowing how to forgive. This way, life becomes lighter and simpler.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.